Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined as ever by Wednesday by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. How are you, my friend?
Very well indeed. 24 hours or so to go, and then we can sleep. But you can tell I'm tired already because I've put the glasses on, and without them, I might just doze off. But they give me an extra bit of focus as we head to the final day.
Absolutely. And with games on at the same time, it's going to be hard for people to watch the games, keep up with what's going on. I'm sure at halftime there'll be updates, full time there'll be updates, and much, much more. And we've got a really packed show for you over the next 45 minutes or so. We'll try to whiz through these stories. We will be talking Chelsea, Aubameyang. We'll be talking Neymar and much, much more. Rumours are circulating today. We're going to take a look at what's been going on at Manchester United today. Is it all over in terms of deals in or out? Although the manager has said it, do we take it 100% seriously? We're going to take a look at Arsenal as well as they look to push for wingers and maybe even a new defensive midfielder between now and the end of the window closing. And we'll take a little bit of a look at the situations at Barcelona. Of course, that involves Chelsea, Aubameyang, De Jong, and much, much more. I wanted to start, though, with Manchester United today. Of course, Anthony finally over the line for 85 million pounds. And then Erik ten Hag today speaks of that's it. No more in, no more out, barring Jimmy Garner. Do you expect that to be the case, or could there still be? Because he did kind of say in the press conference that, but clubs always have to be ready in case a good opportunity presents itself. But would you expect, that was almost leaving the door open a bit, but do you expect that's it now for Manchester United?
Well, if the Glazers are to be believed, they've got the budget, haven't they? And they've changed their transfer budget for the window, so they could move for one more potentially. I think that Dest was the one that was bubbling and now appears to be fully off the table. And that was a little bit lower budget than, say, trying again for Frankie de Jong. I think de Jong to Manchester United is off. I think that they'd given up on that deal, to be perfectly honest with you, for a matter of weeks now. I know that some very credible reports in Holland in particular had said that there'd be a final offensive, but it just never came. And that was in keeping with what I've reported pretty consistently throughout the latter part of the month, that Manchester United were briefing confidence. Why were they briefing confidence? Well, because if they didn't, the transfer window was in danger of looking like a disaster. And the last thing Manchester United wanted was a long-running De Jong saga where they said early they'd given up. But now there's a different complexion on it because Antony's not only a quality signing, but he's a Ten Hag signing rather than only a Manchester United signing. And Casemiro, I think Manchester United fans are rightly excited about. You don't look at the age so much as the influence and the impact that he might have. And it's exactly what Manchester United need. Both of those players are going to be very valuable because they are fresh faces and voices and footballers in that dressing room, which is exactly what any new Manchester United manager needs as he looks to try and stamp his authority. So it's good to see from a Manchester United perspective that they've built a bit of momentum now after that victory over Liverpool, which was a statement, and then to get more of an ugly win, a ground out win, a battling win. It's exactly the kind of game perhaps that they would have lost under a Ralph Rangnick or an Ole Gunnar Solskjaer when things weren't going right. And make no mistake, things haven't started right for Ten Hag with those opening two defeats, but the response on the football field has been fantastic. And he's got those two signings, but I don't think that De Jong has been on the table for quite some time. I can only report what my sources tell me. I got hammered for saying that 2 weeks ago, but I think most are now on the same page. However, they've got there that Frankie de Jong won't be joining Manchester United. Dest is off the table as well. So that doesn't really leave too much more. And then I suppose the nagging doubt for Manchester United has been a late twist and an offer for Cristiano Ronaldo. And I think the club's divided because I think that Joel Glazer doesn't want to sell, period. But Erik ten Hag would be open to a sale. And obviously, if he was to depart, do they need one more? And I suppose that's why they've been linked with a player like Aubameyang, who Chelsea are pushing for. But I think come 10:59, and as you get that mad scramble tomorrow, it's going to be Chelsea that are still waiting on, is there a twist in the De Jong saga? And are they going to get Aubameyang over the line? And I think that Erik ten Hag might well just have Sky Sports News on, a blanket, a cup of tea, and be saying that's that. It's very rare for a manager to say that the window is closed 24 hours or so before the window is closed, unless they're being genuine. And the final thing I would add is that Manchester United's deadline for the window to some extent may well have been moved forwards by 24 hours because they, of course, have got a game on deadline day. And I think that does make a big difference into how a club works, particularly with outgoings. And naturally, if that team is named and Cristiano Ronaldo is anywhere near the squad, then that is probably an unofficial confirmation that he's going nowhere. So I don't think we're going to have to wait until 11 to find out who might leave Manchester United. And I also think because they're so busy around the match day cycle, that's why they've wanted to get their business done by, I would say, this morning, if they were going to move for a player like Dest, as opposed to trying to do business at the same time as they're trying to focus on the football game.
Yeah, like I agree with that. As you say, it's very rare that a club would sign someone whilst they're playing a football match. Very, very unlikely to happen. And I think the Ronaldo news, everyone's got a different view and opinion. There's Man United fans arguing about it. I think it's a combination of, well, I think the biggest reason he hasn't gone is because he hasn't been able to find a club that suits his needs, can pay his wages, and that's willing to that wants him at the same time. I think it's become a little bit of an issue. That the only, I suppose, for me as a United fan, all I hope is that Ronaldo, when he knows he isn't leaving, accepts it, gets down and works hard, because already you can kind of tell that he's not, although he's part of the plans, as Ten Hag says. I think with a fit Martial, Anthony coming in, Rashford being fit, like he's not first choice, and that's something that Ronaldo's got to learn to handle and deal with, and that might be a difficult thing for Erik Ten Hag to kind of manage. But I think most Man United fans are relatively satisfied with the window from where it was, say, 4 or 5 weeks back. Definitely a few more players I would have loved to have seen come in. Now, another attacker, I'd have loved the new right back. It would have been great. And even another midfield player, still with players like Tielemans out there seemingly available. You kind of feel like, could we not try? But that looks like all she wrote in relation to that. And one of the teams that's challenging us for a top 4 position this year, they've had a brilliant start to the campaign, has been Arsenal. And Arsenal, Ben, we know, have suffered an injury to Thomas Partey. He's out for quote-unquote weeks. El Neni is out for weeks. And there's been a lot of talk in the last 24 hours about this young, I'm now forgetting the country that he's from. The Ukrainian Neymar on the wings. There we go. I don't know why I was going to call him Uzbekistani, and I had no idea why the word Uzbekistan was in my head. They're linked to him. There's, of course, Tielemans, but now talk of Danilo and a potential bid going in from Arsenal for him. What's the latest, as you understand it, on Arsenal's potential incomings in this next 24 hours?
So Danilo is actually quite difficult, despite wide admiration for him. And I think the valuation will put Arsenal off that move. No bid has been made for Danilo so far. So that's going to have to escalate relatively quickly if anything is to progress. Mykhaylo Mudryk, who is the Ukrainian Neymar, the beauty, if you forget where he's from, is that he has that slightly glib nickname. So if you remember Ukrainian Neymar, then you're always going to know where he's from. But he's at Shakhtar Donetsk, and Arsenal are definitely monitoring that situation. Brentford and Everton are also in the mix as well. The challenge really is that Everton have tried first and had an all-in bid, including add-ons of 30 million euros, rejected. And I was told that Arsenal, when they actually approached the situation, so that's not a bid, that's not a negotiation, that is a starting point. It usually comes through intermediaries. The valuation was around 10 million apart. So I think that Shakhtar may be saying that they want something in the region of 50 million euros, which is about 40 million quid. My understanding, as I reported yesterday, is that all in, it would be more like 35 that they would be open to, and that Arsenal ultimately are starting from a position of 25. And given that Everton, even though they bid slightly more all in, had a rejected bid, it's going to be quite hard to get this one done quickly and hit the necessity of Shakhtar's position, which is that they're simply not going to waste any time late in this window engaging unless a certain number is hit. So Arsenal haven't made a bid. They've approached the situation through intermediaries. There's no direct club-to-club contact at the moment. but a player to watch not only in this window, obviously, and the beauty of this stage of the window is that clubs not only have to make decisions and move fast, but it's not only proactive, as in we'd like a player, it's reactive. Another club has bid for a player. So if you were going to wait until January, and we may see this with Tielemans as well, you might have to escalate a bid now. Otherwise, you're going to lose out. And in a World Cup year with one or two different players, obviously it's not applicable for Mudryk, but there will be others like Tielemans that may say, you know what? I don't want to toil at Leicester for 6 months. I was going to wait for Arsenal, but now Newcastle have bid, or now Liverpool have bid. So I've changed my mind. And then Arsenal would have to be reactive if they still want the player. And that's what makes part of the window so interesting. But with Mudryk, there's been no official bid. With Danilo, there's been no official bid. There are 3 Premier League clubs interested in Youri Tielemans. We know that Arsenal are definitely one of them, but are they going to move, or is their priority now a defensive midfielder? And the other thing about Arsenal is that they've made such a good start to the season, and Arteta likes the chemistry, that maybe they do just focus on a winger, and Mudryk obviously falls into that category. The other appeal for the young Ukrainian is that he can play on both flanks. So he's actually the wrong side in terms of the winger that Arsenal are looking for, but he does have that ability to play right and left. And I think that Arteta sees that versatility and sees that ability if he was to join, whether it is late in this window, which I think is less likely at this point, or possibly in January and beyond, then there is that option to kind of shape him. And I think that Arteta just really enjoys young players that have that versatility and that don't really have an obviously weak foot. And that obviously allows Arteta to use them in a much more dynamic way, a much more progressive way. And also within a game management situation where it's not working on one side, they move over to the other side. And I think that he definitely has that hunger to learn and develop and add more strings to his bow. So Arsenal could end up ending this window, even though it will disappoint fans listening, signing a big fat 0. And that will not be a reflection on a poor window. It will be a reflection on the fact that they're happy with what they've got, even with some injuries. But the fact that El Neni has picked up a knock has definitely changed the mentality. So Arsenal were quite relaxed. They were only going to buy for the sake of it. And if the right name at the right price, and it had to be both, didn't come up, I would say 10 days ago, they'd have said, we'll revisit some of these targets in January. But now they're in a position where they might have to move a little bit more out of necessity, which is why it's going to be an interesting finish to the window from Arsenal's perspective to see whether they do get one more over the line.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is interesting. I mean, it's the 2 injuries to El Neni and Thomas Partey have really sort of sparked this kind of push. And it's an interesting thing you say there about Danilo, because some of the tweets and, you know, some of the stories, which we obviously quote when we tweet and then say discussing today's stories with Ben Jacobs, to be very clear that it's not you saying those things. I'm always very conscious of that. You know, some of the reports are very much suggesting that, you know, Arsenal are working on this deal. They've made an inquiry, and some reports suggesting that a bid could come in. But you feel like the Danilo one would actually be quite difficult from this point, really?
I mean, that's my understanding. Obviously, there's gamesmanship at this stage of the window. And a little known fact about this period is that you have to almost be careful not to make a player think that they are your plan B. So if you're weighing up 4 or 5 targets and you may need to go to whoever you home in on, whether out of desire or necessity, and that player has got other options, you don't want to necessarily sell too many names or too much interest, because first of all, you may not know what direction you're 100% heading in. And second of all, you don't want that player to feel like they're only going to be an option for Arsenal if, for example, something else doesn't come off. So that's one aspect. And then from the perspective of the club who are selling, there's so little time left that they often want to distance themselves from any interest and not confirm it as the seller, because it might unsettle the player and he still might end up at the football club. So there's a lot of secrecy and there's a lot of transparency, and the transparency comes from the agents throwing names around last minute. Sometimes there's distraction tactics. Sometimes clubs want stuff out there because they actually would like a fee, and that fee needs to be big. So they put that fee out there, and then if it's not met, they can turn around to the player and say, we tried, but the fee just wasn't met. So that's where the gamesmanship comes in. But from Arsenal's perspective, they're obviously looking at some later last minute targets out of opportunism and necessity because of the injuries, and they've got some longer term targets perhaps perhaps that they would get over the line if they're possible. And at this point, if they're only going to sign, for example, one, I would say two maximum, and that would constitute one that they want, probably a winger, and one in midfield, and maybe a reaction to the injuries that they've got to the players that you've mentioned. But they don't want to put too much out there at this stage because they are probably weighing up an option A or an option B. And they certainly don't want to give too much away to their competitors at this stage, because otherwise that can either hike up the price or it can simply unsettle a player. And with Danilo specifically, from the Palmeiras end, they are being very clear that they are highly, highly reluctant to sell, and they don't want to rush into anything at this point, and time is ticking. And then from Arsenal's point of view, I've always been told that the valuation and the toughness with which negotiations would happen, coupled with the speed, because time, as I say, is running out in this window, would make this very hard to pull off. Now, other clubs might counter that by at the last minute, just putting down a big offer, a take it or leave it with a preferential structure, and maybe they're working verbally at this point. And that's another confusing part of the window at this stage, that there's no time to place a formal offer, wait for a response. You use intermediaries and direct contact. You're often going back and forth verbally. If you place a bid and it's rejected, the buyer and the seller, again, might just deny it. That's very commonplace in the window, because don't want to unsettle the player, and they don't want to let it out there that they've failed late on in a window. If Arsenal sign no one, the narrative will be that they never wanted them. Just like Chelsea are saying, well, we only ever valued Anthony Gordon at 40 million, but I can categorically tell you that they placed a bid of 45. So how do they only value Anthony Gordon at 40 million? This is a backpedaling of PR, which every club does, not because they want the media to know or the fans to know, but you want it out there now in the market that you were not prepared to pay 60 million plus for Anthony Gordon if you're Chelsea, if you don't think it's going to happen, because you've got to go out there and try and get other players late in the window, and you don't want other sellers to feel like you had that money, because they may use Gordon as a case study and say, well, the player we're offering you is like for like, so we want the same valuation. So then Chelsea suddenly say, well, that valuation was 40 million, not 60 million.
Yeah.
And this is same with everything. But with Danilo, my understanding is no bid has been placed, and that the clubs are themselves distancing themselves from that potential deal at this stage with so little time left in the window.
There we go. Comprehensive update, Arsenal fans. Make sure you're all smashing that like button to support the show. Make sure you subscribe to The Terrace as well and click on the bell notification button. You briefly mentioned Tielemans. We know Arsenal were interested. You mentioned two other Premier League clubs. My understanding is that's Newcastle and Liverpool. Is that right?
Well, Liverpool have looked at Tielemans earlier in the window. They completely denied Tielemans. They were not interested. It was all agent talk, but he has, out of necessity, been one of the names that they've put on their shortlist because they were looking for a midfielder. But Liverpool don't buy for the sake of it. And it remains to be seen whether they're sold on Tielemans. And of the three clubs, and I do believe that they are Liverpool, Newcastle and Arsenal, Manchester United were considering Tielemans earlier in the window. But if Erik ten Hag is to be believed, they're not going to move. And were they to do so, there potentially becomes such a high volume of clubs trying late on that Leicester may hold out for their price. So this is a really interesting one to watch for a variety of different reasons. Number one, do Leicester need to sell and get that fee as badly now they've got the Wesley Fofana money and in a very preferential payment structure? Number two is, does Tielemans just still want Arsenal? And if that's the case, are Arsenal going to try and make him wait and get him on a free transfer? And then from Leicester's point of view, are they going to counteract that and try and get Tielemans to unexpectedly sign a new deal if he stays? And then that raises the value again. So there's lots of moving parts here. Tielemans would like the move. Arsenal would be his preference. None of that has changed. But Arsenal, as I understand it, and contrary to some reports, have not yet placed a bid. And the alleged bid of 19 million is below Arsenal's valuation from 3 weeks ago, where through intermediaries, they were talking about a package of about 23 million. But what we know from Arsenal's perspective is that they would like to pay under 25 million for Tielemans, and Leicester want 30 to 35 million all in. And that's been very consistent across the window. It's never been 50 million for Tielemans. 40 has always been a push, but you might hear it quoted in some places. And that's basically because it would be a small profit for Leicester comparative to what they paid for Youri Tielemans. So this one, I think, will still move. And the reason for that is because there is a growing interest. Even West Ham, by the way, have looked at Tielemans over the course of the window, but they haven't moved as yet. So are we going to get a surprising scenario where nobody bids for Tielemans? Are we going to get a slightly more plausible scenario where somebody has persuaded Tielemans to just hang on and then they'll get him for a free? Or are we going to get a bidding war late on in the window and then Leicester are going to get their valuation? And something's got to give at some point. And there's definitely more clubs circling. And it's a surprise that a player with this amount of creativity and Premier League quality, as of the time of recording, doesn't really have a concrete and agreed option yet. Yeah. And it's not really because Leicester are playing that much hard ball. You could argue that 30 million is a bit hardball with a year left on the contract. You could argue that 35 million with add-ons included is unrealistic, but that means that that would be a counter position from Leicester to a definitive offer somewhere in the mid-20s. And my understanding still remains that we haven't had that yet. We've got 3 Premier League clubs circling. Newcastle have not yet tabled a formal offer. There have, though, been some talks through intermediaries. And the same applies for Arsenal. From Liverpool's perspective, they work pretty secretly. And Jurgen Klopp's already said that their top midfielder choice that they wanted went to another club. So they might have moved on at this point. But let's see how Tielemans moves. Still very possible that he goes before the deadline. Still very possible that he goes at 10:59, a minute before the deadline comes in. And obviously Arsenal fans, I think, would welcome the move. But let's see how they react, because on the one hand, they want a winger or a creative-minded player. On the other hand, they wanted a kind of more central, attack-minded midfielder, but now they've got injury problems. So are they going to turn to a more defensive-minded midfielder? And unfortunately, from Tielemans' perspective, that just isn't him. And again, coming back to what I said before, they have agreed long-standing broad terms with Tielemans, and they've spoken to Tielemans' representative since January. So if there's buy-in from the player for Arsenal, then does that become January or the summer if they feel that there's more urgent priorities now in the short term? And to be honest with you, at this stage in the window, with a lot of moving parts, Arsenal are giving nothing away. It may well be that they line up Tielemans, they look at defensive options, and they line up wingers, and then right at the death, they only go for one of those options. And that is the kind of chaos and part of the window that we're at the moment, which obviously makes it very difficult as a journalist to cover. But to reiterate, and contrary to some reports out there, it is not my understanding at the time of recording that Arsenal have placed a formal bid for Youri Tielemans.
Thank you very much, Ben. I want to stay in London. There's so much trending right now about Chelsea. It's unbelievable. And we'll get on to Aubameyang. We'll get on to Gvardiol. There's talk of Rafael Leao, and the Times are speaking about Rafael Leao and De Jong. But I wanted to start with one of the rumors that's been going crazy. Everyone knew you were on today. I've had about 10 DMs saying, God, can you ask him about this? Again, when we spoke about this, I think on our first ever show, but Neymar to Chelsea has raised its head again. The Daily Mail have spoken about it, and a few other sort of really reputable, like as in verified publications. Is it possible that Chelsea sign Neymar, or at the very this window? Is that plausible? Possible? Could it happen today, stroke tomorrow?
It's not my understanding. I spoke to PSG only about an hour ago and last night as well. And the feeling at their end is that if Chelsea are coming in for Neymar, they don't know about it yet, which means that there's nothing advanced. Now, sometimes you withhold a bid and come in late to give the seller no choice to dilly-dally, if you like. But Neymar's position is also very clear that he wants to stay at PSG. And he's made a scintillating start to the season in a World Cup year. So I sense that Neymar to anywhere might be more an immediately after the World Cup or next summer move rather than necessarily right now. But what we are seeing Chelsea do, and the same with De Jong, is just make late direct pitches to players, whether formally or informally, to see whether they can tempt them with terms. And I think that's really interesting from Chelsea's perspective, because this ownership group are actually trying to get a lot of the high earners off the books, but also provide long-term contracts to young players and have incentive-based contracts that mean that their wage bill goes down in terms of its base, but up if Chelsea perform. And then you look at De Jong and Neymar, and they have allegedly been offered late window massive contracts, particularly De Jong. There's nothing actually that suggests that Chelsea have got into the specific financials of Neymar, but I know that some of the reports talk about what they might be hypothetically prepared to pay. So that's interesting because it goes against Chelsea's strategy financially speaking, but I suppose it's in keeping with their strategy as far as Todd Boehly and Thomas Tuchel wanting a marquee signing. And of course, De Jong's going to get a lot of excitement because Chelsea have been pushing to some extent all window at the player side. But I still think with that, he's more likely to stay. And that has been my consistent belief, talking to sources close to the player and to Barcelona now for at least the last 7 days. And there was nothing really in his visit to London either. So unless he U-turns and decides he just wants a boatload of money, then he's at his dream club and he'll let the window tick away and then he'll deal with the Barcelona financials a little bit later. The only caveat to the De Jong situation is if Barcelona miraculously pull Bernardo Silva out the hat, that again may change things. And I've said many times from day one when it was only really Manchester United that if De Jong is to leave Barcelona, he'll have to be forced out of the football club. That hasn't yet happened. If Bernardo Silva arrives or they need some of his transfer fee to fund Bernardo Silva, to register Bernardo Silva and so on, things may change. So that's just one to watch only in the sense that Neymar's clear cut. PSG don't mind if they keep him now come the end of the window and Neymar wants to stay. Whereas with De Jong, he may say he wants to stay, but if something out of De Jong's control changes at Barcelona, the mood and the dynamic may be altered. And that's when Chelsea may pounce with a high value offer and Barcelona may tell De Jong, listen, we really need you to leave this football club now. And if you don't, then you're going to find yourself down in the pecking order in midfield because Silva's arriving and down in the pecking order in central defence because Jules Koundé is there and he doesn't even want to really play in central defence. So De Jong is a slightly more unpredictable situation. Neymar at the moment, PSG are laughing it off as rumour mill. They really don't think that Chelsea are going to come calling. And if they do, it's going to be very late in the day because, to reiterate, at this stage, through intermediaries or direct club-to-club contact, there has been nothing between Chelsea and PSG for the transfer of Neymar. If that changes, it is because Chelsea are internally considering it and they're lining up whatever they may offer, and then they're going to come to PSG very late in the window. But the intimation at Neymar's end is that he wants to stay at PSG. Gaultier loves Neymar. They've actually developed a really strong relationship. So the one that would be willing to sell Neymar is Luis Campos because it's part of his strategy to buy younger and, where possible, French. But it's going to take a lot. It's going to take almost a final blind offer. And by final blind offer, I mean if, and it is an if, there is substance to Chelsea's interest and PSG don't know about it, then Chelsea are going to have to come calling fast and with a final offer and a blind offer that they think will get this done quickly. And if there is any negotiation needed, then it will not get done. And the halfway house, of course, would be some kind of loan, but there's still negotiation there. Chelsea paying all of the wages. Is there an option to buy? And does Neymar want the move? And is he prepared to go on loan in a World Cup year when he's in red hot form? So these are things that all need to be resolved and time is running out. So at the moment, I think this is more rumour than substance, but let's see whether Chelsea surprise us in the final hours of the window.
Absolutely. And one of the other stories about Chelsea, which I say the young element didn't catch me off guard, but the aggregator Chelsea are quoting it and, clicks on their links, and the Times, who again, we'll say the Times are pretty credible, have stated that Chelsea have not given up on Frankie de Jong, and also that they're in talks to try and sign Rafael Leao. So it appears like, based on what you said there may not be a formal approach, but could this just be the case that Chelsea are sort of a little like you said with Arsenal? They're working on these 2 or 3 deals, and maybe at one point tomorrow it might just be, let's go all in with something massive for De Jong, all in with something massive for Rafael Leao. Because again, the Times wouldn't just report on absolute nonsense. I'm sure they wouldn't. There has to be some kind of substance to this. Or from your point of view, do you feel like those 2 deals are just off the table, impossible from this point?
No, I mean, Neymar, I think, is not possible. And I think that Chelsea know that. So there may be some kind of leaked intimation that they tried, which again can be PR because fans respect that ambition. But De Jong has never been off the table. I mean, I've said many times on this show and elsewhere that Chelsea always have felt they are the likely destination for Frenkie de Jong if he leaves Barcelona. And at the moment, De Jong still wants to stay at Barcelona. But a lot can change in the next 24 hours that's out of De Jong's control. And Chelsea are there. They've put down a competitive offer and they have to wait and see how it plays out now, which is sort of good and bad because they know what they've got to pay for De Jong and they know what De Jong wants, but they also know that De Jong's preference away from the financials is to stay at Barcelona. So if anything changes, there's a ready-made deal there and Chelsea can pounce very quickly. And that will be the twist of the window. So De Jong to Chelsea is one to watch. I've said many times, the preference is UCL, is London, it's Chelsea over Manchester United. I think that's proven by the fact that Manchester United have moved on to other targets and Chelsea haven't. But they're still waiting. It is still one of those deals that Chelsea cannot force over the line through their own negotiation. They have to wait and see whether De Jong is going to just let the window shut, whether Barcelona are going to force him out of the football club, whether there's going to be any other incomings to Barcelona. And that's what makes the deadline day tomorrow so exciting. So I would certainly not say that it is an advanced deal comparative to, say, Aubameyang, but you cannot rule it out categorically. So there is substance to it, which is why we report on it. With Leao, it's a little bit different. And I think much like Gvardiol, it could be one of those even where Chelsea explore some kind of agreement if they make progress, but not for this window. Because if they want Leao in this window, the position of Milan is quite clear that the release clause must be met or somewhere close. And unless Chelsea are going to get there by offloading players, and we know that Todd Bowley's been desperate to at least do one swap deal during this window, that's going to be hard to make the financials really work. So you're not in talks at this stage of the window unless you think you have a realistic chance. If you think it's a complete lost cause, you're wasting your time. So that's good news. But talks don't always mean progress because talks can be through intermediaries, which means that you're constantly spinning plates, as I've said many times, but those plates are spun with different intermediaries whilst you look at the bigger picture and you talk to your manager as a sporting director and then you decide what is feasible. So Chelsea are not prepared to just end this window now with their 250 odd million spent. They'll happily break the British transfer record for cumulative spending and go over 300 million for the right target. So again, Leao is a bit different to De Jong because if the price is hit, Leao will leave. He's already intimated that the terms that Milan are talking about to get him to sign a new deal are not perfect. So he can't drive himself out of the club at this point. I don't think it would be feasible for Chelsea to pay the release clause for Leao, and that's probably what's being discussed between intermediaries to see whether there's any leeway. But that is a €100 million player, I think, as a minimum. And it will be really interesting to see whether Chelsea move, and if they do, at the expense of what else. Obviously, with Gvardiol, it will be different because if they sign him in a year's time for €90 million, they may not have to pay anything until the next summer window starts, or they may be able to pay in very small installments, and under financial fair play you can offset that fee over several years. So it's not so much that 90 plus 100 is 190, wow, it's 400 million of spending, they can't afford that, because it can be staggered, and Gvardiol's 2023 if it comes off. So I would say that Neymar's not really one to watch. De Jong is an outside chance, but it becomes very, very likely if Barcelona move in other areas and force him out the football club, then Chelsea are first in line. And Leao just requires paying above market value. And let's see whether Chelsea choose to do that. They looked at Leao maybe 10 days ago and were put off by the valuation, and Milan weren't that interested in any kind of swap deal. So we wait and see whether anything changes on that, but there's certainly some substance to it.
Absolutely, sounds like it. Another striker we know that Chelsea are heavily involved with, talks reportedly going on as we speak. There has been an injury to Aubameyang after the horrendous attack that him and his family suffered at home, but a deal that Chelsea are still trying to get over the line. We understand Aubameyang to Chelsea. How likely do you feel that deal is to go through at this stage?
Well, there's final talks taking place now, and there's always been two offers on the table. One which is about 15 million quid plus Alonso, and then a straight cash deal. And Barca had cooled on Alonso, with cooled being code to some extent for not being able to, at that point, register him and other priorities like Bernardo Silva. Now it remains to be seen whether or not they want Alonso or not. But there's still a possibility that Chelsea will get their original offer accepted right at the death once Barcelona assess the overall complexion and what they can and can't do. And that would be 15 million plus Alonso. And that's a ready-made deal. It's there. There'd be no negotiation needed. The secondary offer from Chelsea was straight cash. And they basically said to Barcelona, and still are asking Barcelona to decide between the two. And they're insisting on a swap deal. So therefore, if it's not a swap deal, the straight cash deal is lower. And that's the point of contention, that Barca are not going to accept a lower cash deal. But Chelsea are not going to just match like for like the swap deal and the straight cash deal, because then there's no incentive to force Barcelona to take the player plus cash. And that, again, is the finesse and the gamesmanship of any good negotiation. Chelsea are saying you can either have 24 million all in, which is 15 million plus Alonso, or you can have 18 million all in, which is straight cash. And Barca are saying, nope, we want 20 plus million. And Chelsea are saying, if you want 20 plus million, you take Alonso, and then you take your 15 million. And they've gone round and round and round to some extent. Now, because unfortunately Aubameyang was horrifically assaulted and has got a fractured jaw and will be out for some time, there's a complication. The injury itself doesn't impact too much, but I think that from Chelsea's perspective, they first of all need to confirm the injury, because that is factored into the deal. And then they need to decide if they still want a permanent deal or a loan deal. So there might even be 3 offers on the table. But the nuts and bolts are there for any deal in any way, in any direction, because both clubs need to move fast. And then it will all depend on Aubameyang. And broad personal terms have been agreed with Aubameyang. But what hasn't been yet agreed with Aubameyang, as I understand it, is 100% the length of the contract, which is still a sticking point. So Aubameyang actually wants 2 years definite, 1 year extension, and Chelsea ideally want 1 year definite, possibly with an option to extend. And if they don't get an agreement on that, that's where the loan may come in, and they may say, well, okay, we'll just do a straight loan for now, or a straight loan with an option to buy. And if all goes well, we'll give you a second year as a 1 year permanent deal after a loan. So that's all going round and round and round in the moment. And the reason why there's so many options on the table is because Aubameyang wants 1 length, Chelsea want 1 length, and then Barcelona aren't sure if they want Alonso. Yeah, obviously everyone's going to have to make their mind up quite quickly, but I still think Aubameyang to Chelsea is more likely than not.
Yeah, I mean, again, another great comprehensive breakdown on what's going on there. And of course, as you mentioned, the situation with his home, the water slowed things down somewhat further as well. The other bit of Chelsea news, which I know kind of caught people off guard yesterday, and you already alluded to it already, the Gvardiol rumor, 77 million, 90 million euro offer to secure the player for next year. And as you say, very unlikely to spend that money this summer, but to secure that player for an agreement next year. How has that progressed? And do you feel that will close before the deadline, or is it something where Chelsea will actually go, well, we don't need to close it before the deadline. We'll focus on Aubameyang, etc. now, and maybe that will finalize in a week, 2-3 weeks, something like that?
Well, I think they will have to close it before the deadline. That's the first thing to say.
Okay.
And the reason for that, unless the structure has changed, my understanding is that the player becomes a Chelsea footballer now and then is loaned back as a Chelsea footballer for the outstanding year, as opposed to a pre-agreement where he is not a Chelsea player and then in a year's time he becomes a Chelsea player. Because there's higher risk to that, because if in that year when he's not a Chelsea player anything happens, then that makes the deal, the terms, the liability, everything really more complicated. So Chelsea effectively take on the liability and then they loan back, and that is the structure of the deal. And it's very similar, therefore, to the young goalkeeper Gaga Slonina, who has joined Chelsea now, been loaned straight back to Chicago Fire to finish the MLS season, and then will return again in January. Now, there is the other option, like you say, that if you can't get it over the line, then you just line it up for another window. And that's not impossible, for sure. But my understanding is that it would be a Chelsea signing now and then a loan back, not a Chelsea signing in a year's time and then business as usual for the player. But both options could be being considered. So I certainly don't have definitive information, but that was the last update, that it would be he would join Chelsea permanently in 2023 and be loaned back. And if that option was to materialize, they'll want the deal done before deadline day. If they flip it and they decide it is more preferable to just pre-agree terms, then they've got all the time in the world. They could complete it after the window, but obviously there's no eligibility. They could complete it in January. They could wait a year. But there's that nagging doubt, if you don't get it done, that somebody else hijacks it, or there's a change of valuation, or there's an injury. Lots of things can affect the deal, is what I'm saying. The fee is over 75 million. It's around 90 million euros that's being discussed. The negotiations are pretty advanced, which again probably tells you, if they're prioritizing it this late in the window, that they do want to get it done before the close of the window. And the final thing to add on this is that it's, again, just very smart learning on the job from Todd Boehly. And the reason why I say that is because Chelsea originally inquired about Sesko, right? Mm-hmm. And we learned from the Sesko deal that within that Red Bull group, Salzburg wanted to keep him for a bit, and then he'll go to Leipzig and he'll stay in the family. And that's the right move for his career. When Chelsea inquired about Gvardiol earlier in the window, they were simply told, not for sale, game over, impossible this window. And then they pursued Sesko completely separately. Obviously, we are talking about two different clubs here, but they're part of the same group. And in learning about the story of Sesko, Boehly realized how that Red Bull group works, how they negotiate, how important it is for them to not only get sell-on fees. And I think everyone thinks that the Red Bull group are all about bringing a player through pathways and then finally selling them on for a big profit. But there's also that building aspect, particularly with Leipzig, about making sure that they're highly competitive, and obviously they're qualifying regularly for European football. So it's not only about being a selling club, there's that football strategy running concurrently as well. So when they know a player will go somewhere and for big value, they want to try and cling on to the football side for as much as possible. And it's the same with Sesko, that he's moved from Salzburg to Leipzig and then eventually will follow a path like may happen with Gvardiol, where he'll end up at one of the major teams, most likely in Europe. And Boehly learned that. So then when he then came back to Leipzig a little bit later in the window, he said, listen, you can have your cake and eat it. Because what we've seen from Sesko is that you want to bring somebody to Leipzig. And what we've seen with Leipzig is you want to hold on to Gvardiol at least for one more season. So why not have your cake and eat it? Why not have a guaranteed fee now, a pre-agreement now, stability now? The player remains with you now, and then we will take him in a year's time. Now, that's not Boehly reinventing the transfer window, but it's definitely Boehly being in the thick of it as an interim sporting director, and from experience talking about Gvardiol earlier in the window and from inquiries about Sesko, getting a better understanding of how the Red Bull Football Group at large do business. And if this deal gets over the line, it will be his experience in learning on the job and getting an idea off Sesko and just talking to Leipzig directly and understanding their strategy that will be the reason why, if this comes off, he's able to get that business done.
There we go. Again, I think a very good piece of business according to a lot of people. We have some questions that have come in here. First was more of a statement from Gio that says Chelsea would have to meet the release clause of Leao, which this late is 150 million. And with Boehly, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, that I'll pay that much, but like that there'll be a big bid. And Nabil here, being a bit cheeky, says Ben will be forced out of a job if Frankie de Jong leaves for any other club but Chelsea. I'm sure that won't happen to the brilliant Ben Takers, but thank you, Nabil. A question here from CFC Jack says, Gordon and Zaha news. Is there any updates on those potential moves?
Gordon, I think, is gone. And the fact that Chelsea are briefing, they only ever valued him at 40 million tells you that, because they definitely presented a higher offer than that. So Frank Lampard's been quite bullish for the best part of a week. He obviously scored in his last game and played. And even though his head's been turned by Chelsea, I think that one is for another window. Zaha is the interesting one to watch. I don't think Arsenal are as seriously in the race as perhaps has been reported. And if they were going to move, we'd have seen it by now. It's an option for Chelsea. I think they're still waiting to determine what's going to happen with Aubameyang before asking Thomas Tuchel whether they need two attackers, and also seeing whether anything transpires with the exit of Hakim Ziyech, who obviously was also involved in Chelsea's last game. And Tuchel definitely doesn't want an overload. And Chelsea, perhaps in certain areas, even if they've not got players that are in form, have still got numbers, and numbers equals wage bill and squad space and dressing room dynamic and so on. So I think that Zaha is also not impossible. He would be a really, really good fit for Chelsea. And he has started the season extraordinarily well as well. He has played 4 games, scored 4 goals. You can't ask for anything more than that. And he got 14 goals in the Premier League last season. The challenge is really going to be that Zaha may want the move, and I think that's absolutely true, but Crystal Palace are highly, highly reluctant to sell. People will put 2 and 2 together, and again, in that football manager mentality, and some would say that Todd Bowley mentality, they will make an argument that if Palace want Conor Gallagher and he wants regular football, and there's only 2 spots in the Chelsea midfield, is there any way of doing a swap deal? Zaha one way, Gallagher the other. My understanding is that that's impossible, and that Chelsea are going to be quite firm on Gallagher and Broja. And if they were to go to another club, it will be a loan. They really don't want to get rid of them. But occasionally at the last part of the window, you get a player making an unexpected and slightly bullish statement saying, listen, I've given it the first few games of the season. I'm not getting the game time here. You're going to have to let me go. So Zaha's one to watch for sure from Chelsea's perspective. If I was to rank the players that they would like to bring in, Zaha wouldn't be number 1, but that's not to say that it's not impossible, because I think that of all the teams we've mentioned, if one club is to make 2 or 3 signings in the last 24 hours, first team signings, that will be Chelsea. They're still going to be very busy between now and when the window closes.
Most definitely. And just very quickly, because I know you've got to jump out in a few moments, but Caicedo to Liverpool. A lot of people are asking, will Liverpool make a bid? Is this deal doable? Caicedo from Brighton to Liverpool.
No, I don't think that Caicedo is possible. I think that he's under a new agent from what I understand. And because of his age, the move is actually more complicated in terms of its structure and in terms of the paperwork required to actually facilitate that from Liverpool's perspective. That's what I understand. It's actually quite problematic. And Brighton obviously would like to keep the player as well. I think he only made 8 Premier League appearances last season. And then this season, he's integral. So that is important in terms of the understanding of Caicedo. It isn't just about convincing Brighton, and it isn't just about agreeing a deal. It's one of those transfers that's actually quite problematic from a logistical point of view to get over the line.
There we go. Okay, sorry, I was just reading the comment from someone. I thought it was important, but they're having a go at each other in the comment section. So it's great for you lot, but we'll leave it there. Ben, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend. And I just want to say great work all through Terry and Ben. Well, this works, Ben. Ben, I just sit here and ask a few questions and listen to Ben. Someone did write a comment, made me laugh earlier. They said, I swear Ben wrote and/or invented a dictionary. I'm like, listen, just because the guy can speak well, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But Ben, listen, always a pleasure speaking. I'm sure we'll maybe catch up after the transfer window closes. Now a bit of a review show after sort of 3 months of kind of going through these once a week. And I appreciate all the effort you've put in for the Terrace over the course of the summer, mate. I really, really do.
Always a pleasure. Enjoyed it. Keep up the good work, and let's hope we can continue when the window closes, and that way it'll be a bit more relaxed, and we might actually have had some sleep. But yeah, always enjoy it. Hope everybody has the end to the window that they're looking for.
Absolutely. Ben, we'll speak to you again soon. I know you've got to shoot off, and we'll catch up soon. Cheers, Ben. Thank you, mate. Cheers. Ben had to shoot a little bit early. He was a little bit late. He had a problem with his computer. People keep mentioning the hairline. It's looking good. I need another trim, though, to be fair. I need another haircut. But yeah, lots of great updates in there. And look, you know, we're doing the match reactions later tomorrow. We'll be keeping you abreast tomorrow on deadline day with updates from this. But if you're only just tuning in, lots of great things updated. The Neymar deal probably not going to be happening. And the Daily Mail and talking about this deal was on. This deal could progress. That's been detailed. Arsenal going in for Danilo. Arsenal and Yuri Tielemans. Arsenal and their pursuit of a winger. All detailed in this video. So if you've only just tuned in, watch it back when it re-uploads. We'll get the timestamps in for you. Updates on Gvardiol, Jong, Ronaldo, Aubameyang, and much, much more. And over the course of, say, the next 24 hours, we will keep you abreast. We will keep you up to date. We'll give you a place to come and speak about these situations as well. A lot of people saying speak about De Jong. Look, the De Jong deal, the exit from Barcelona is still on. Man United appear to have walked away. They've gone and signed Casemiro instead. Chelsea apparently are still looking, and Ben has confirmed that today on this show. Listen, we're back with you tomorrow for more updates. Until next time, people, smash the like and the share buttons.